Chapter 1071. Tyranny's Rookie. Chen Guo said she was going to scold Chang Xian, but she was just saying it. Chang Xian had good intentions, although it was rather depressing that his help ended up doing no good. Chen Guo and Yi Shu had wasted time and effort going there to not get a sponsor, but they didn't lose anything either, so it wasn't too bad. So in the call, Chen Guo still expressed her gratitude before giving a simple explanation of why they couldn't get the sponsorship from TKA Green. Then, she asked if Chang Xian had any other recommendations. Cao Guangcheng, who was listening in, knew that Happy had wasted their time on this and basked in secret delight. He had been Excellent Era's team reporter for all these years, so he naturally knew what the deal with TKA Green was and what kind of person Sha Zongtian was. He knew from the beginning that Happy wouldn't get anything from Sha Zongtian. From the phone call, it sounded as if Sha Zongtian had asked them to visit. This was unexpected. He had thought it would be pretty good if Happy just got no response. He hadn't thought Sha Zongtian would have called them to visit. He definitely managed to mess with Happy. Cao Guangcheng found it unfortunate that he couldn't have witnessed it in person. He could only imagine it himself to cheer himself up. He had no idea that although Yi Shu and Chen Guo had been stood up at their scheduled appointment, in return, they had also bullied Sha Zongtian for a good while. Chang Xian wasn't an idiot either. He didn't know about the situation regarding TKA Green, but Cao Guangcheng had followed Excellent Era for so long, so how could he have been ignorant to this? Chang Xian had realized that this was Cao Guangcheng's little trick. But even if he knew, he couldn't do anything about it. Nothing would be gained by arguing about it. Except that this time, he wouldn't ask this senior. After agreeing to Chen Guo's request, he prepared to take a look over things himself. With what had occurred, Chang Xian realized that it wouldn't be easy for Happy to take Excellent Era's sponsors. However, Chang Xian was clever. If it wasn't convenient for Excellent Era's sponsors to sponsor Happy because of Happy defeating Excellent Era, then what about these sponsors' competitors? If they sponsored Happy, wouldn't that be a win-win situation? Competition was omnipresent, even in business. Chang Xian decided to bring his thoughts in a different direction and went to look for the competitors of Excellent Era's sponsors. However, this was outside of Chang Xian's area of control. This information wasn't something that Chang Xian had at hand, so it would be slower. Yet he hadn't even managed to do anything before Happy received their first phone call that expressed interest in sponsoring them. This phone call also managed to justify the logic in Chang Xian's thought process. Fike. This was a well-known computer peripheral brand with their keyboards and mouse being the most famous. These two things were doubtlessly the sharpest tool for esports athletes. With how the Glory Alliance flourished, it would be strange if they didn't sponsor anyone. In reality, Fike was already sponsoring a team in the alliance. Tyranny. The team Fike was currently sponsoring was Team Tyranny, who many thought would win the championships. In addition, Fike was the arch-rival of a peripheral device company sponsoring Excellent Era, Speed Serpent. Speed Serpent chose Excellent Era and Fike chose Tyranny. The sponsors were archenemies as well. What Fike was thinking of when they chose to sponsor Happy was clear as day. Fike's headquarters weren't in City H. After getting in contact through the call, Fike and Happy had 2 video meetings to negotiate the sponsorship. Although Happy was a hot topic right now, their fame and influence was nothing compared to Tyranny, and Fike's contract for Happy showed their caution. The contract would be a year long for 1,500,000 RMB, along with the request that their sponsorship would be put above all others. The year length of the contract was clearly a representation of Fike's wait-and-see attitude to Happy's continued survival in the alliance. The request to be considered above all other sponsors showed that they actually had quite a bit of optimism towards this. As for the 1.5 million, it wasn't much if you considered the entirety of the Glory Circle, but for a team that had just arrived in the alliance, it was a considerable amount. This was all thanks to how Happy managed to defeat Excellent Era and gain public attention. Otherwise, for other teams that had managed to fight their way back into the alliance, it wasn't unheard of for them to be completely ignored. After negotiating back and forth for a while, the sponsorship money was eventually raised to 1,800,000 RMB. The other requirements didn't change. Both sides were very satisfied with this contract. Then, the time came to officially sign the contract. Although this was a small contract, Fike wanted to use Happy's current popularity to hold a press conference for the contract signing. However, the playoffs were still ongoing, and the Glory Circle was focused on the competition, so this sort of promotional activity had to be delayed. After completing the contract with Fike, the business doors to Happy were completely opened. They received more and more calls inquiring about sponsorship. Chang Xian had managed to compile a list of worthwhile sponsors, but by then, Chen Guo was already too busy to initiate any attacks. Just the sponsors that were calling was already making her more than busy. Some were sincere, but some were there to try and profit in the chaos. Some even tried to bully Happy through Happy's lack of experience by directly tricking or scamming them. Some even had no idea what was happening and just called to be a part of the action. Chen Guo was finally finding the feel of running a pro team and being the boss. She hadn't really done much in the past. At the same time, the playoffs were already at the semi-finals. Tyranny vs Tiny Herb, Samsara vs Wind Howl. The first match was Team Tiny Herb's home game against Team Tyranny. Team Tiny Herb had gone through a lot of changes this year. The all-star level account Flying Drops had been sold to Samsara and Tiny Herb's lineup lost a grappler. The original player of Flying Drops, Li Yiwei, had also left the team in summer. Xu Bin, the Grind King from 301 Degrees, had taken over the retired Deng Fusheng's Knight, Angelica, and managed to become an all-star with his excellent performances. Then, prodigy Gao Yingji had debuted this season, becoming a part of the Witch duo with his captain, Wang Jiaxi. There was also the hand-speed expert, Liu Xiaobi, who had grown into a very dependable player. He had been mere steps away from becoming an all-star this season. Team Tiny Herb was almost had a 4 all-star lineup. As for Tyranny, it wasn't just 4 all-stars, but 4 top gods of their classes. The only one who was in a little awkward of a position was Lin Jingyan. The other 3 still counted as the top of their respective classes. With this lineup, curiosity towards the person in the other position of their starting lineup was aroused. Since the team competition needed 5 people to fight at once, who would be the 5th person who stood beside the 4 gods? In the summer transfer window, since they were bringing in powerful aces and changing up their lineup, a lot of Tyranny's players and accounts had left. From that time on, everyone had been wondering who would appear beside these 4 gods, but the one who appeared was a person that no one was familiar with. Qin Muyan. Before this season, no one had ever heard this name. He was such a plain and obscure player, yet he had become the last puzzle piece in Tyranny's starting lineup. Qin Muyan had come from Tyranny's training camp. He hadn't had any sort of fame before this, and he was already 21 when he became a part of Tyranny's starting lineup. This debuting age was rather late. Compared to Lu Hanwen, who wasn't even of age yet, he should have been a senior, but now, they were rookies of the same generation. Qin Muyan had a sharpshooter character, and in this position, Tyranny originally had Wang Qishan. Wang Qishan wasn't a god, but he was still a very good player. However, Tyranny still decided to pick Qin Muyan from the training camp, while Wang Qishan left in the summer transfer window. What was special about this Qin Muyan? What allowed him to squeeze out this skilled, experienced Wang Qishan, who was also familiar with the team, making him a core member of the team that stood next to these 4 gods? Everyone held high expectations for Qin Muyan, but soon enough, they were all disappointed. Qin Muyan gave no striking performances on the field, and the data from each match seemed to point out that he was normal. He was just a very average player. Soon enough, no one paid him any attention any longer. Rookie. There were more striking rookies this season. Wasn't Team Blue Rain's 14-year-old Lu Hanwen a riot right now? Thus, if you asked who Qin Muyan was, most players would probably shake their heads in confusion. This was the media, the public's attitude. However, pro teams wouldn't do this. They wouldn't underestimate any opponents, especially in the playoffs, especially a core member of a team like Tyranny. Qin Muyan's data was very average, but don't forget who he's standing next to. Apart from Zhang Jinji, who was a cleric, Han Wenqing, Zhang Jiali and Lin Jingyan weren't just normal all-star players. In their old teams, they were all core DPSers. Next to people like that, what sort of data are you expecting a rookie to the Pro League to have? The media and the players didn't think Qin Muyan important, but Tiny Herb wouldn't do that. A slight mistake might mean that their journey this year would be over. Thus, against Chin Muyan, Tiny Herb put equal attention in research on him as the four gods. Often, in the data for this season, the reports concerning Chin Muyan always started with, "This player's data is average but he hasn't met the rookies block." That's right, he hadn't met the rookies block. In all 9 seasons, only 2 players had never met the rookies block, Wang Jiaxi and Sun Shang. Now, a third had appeared, but compared to the previous 2, he had very average performances. His lack of rookies block might be because of some objective reasons like, with Tyranny's lineup, the four gods took too much attention from players and attacks. Tiny Herb wouldn't reject this sort of possibility, and in reality, they hoped that this was the reason. Otherwise, if it was because Chin Muyan had some sort of hidden talent, then that might become the biggest variable in the match. The unknown was always the scariest. Chapter 1072. God of Healing. The public paid great attention to Tyranny and Tiny Herb's opening match. Happy Internet Cafe also continued its tradition of streaming the matches. However, it was no longer convenient for Yishu and the others to watch in the Internet Cafe with everyone else. After the Challenger League, they could all be considered famous. Although they couldn't be compared to gods, getting surrounded on their home turf wouldn't be anything surprising. Thus, Happy stayed at home, using their projector to watch the first match of the semifinals. By then, the group arena had finished and Team Tiny Herb won 5-4. It could be seen how intense the match was just from the results. Each team had fought to their last person. The players took a break and the broadcast replayed a few spectacular moments from the group arena. Then, it was time for the team competition. Tiny Herb's starting lineup consisted of Wang Jiaxi and Gao Yingji's Witches, Baccaria and Kind Tree, Xu Bin's Knight Angelica, Lu Xiaobi's Blade Master, Flying Swords, and Yuan Boking's Cleric, Oedo. The player list wasn't anything surprising. This was Tiny Herb's typical starting lineup this season. However, those familiar with Tiny Herb would discuss these characters. They're using a cleric, there were plenty of voices discussing this. This was because Team Tiny Herb had 2 healers, not just one. One was the cleric in the lineup this time, Oedo, and the other was the character that had made great contributions to Tiny Herb's 2 championships, Paladin Windguard. During Tiny Herb's 2 champion seasons, they had a player with the title God of Healing, Fang Shijian. This player was a dual healer expert, and was immensely skilled in both healer classes. Using a different healer class depending on the circumstances and needs was a large part of Tiny Herb's strategy back then. A cleric's attack support and a paladin's defense, Fang Shijian was able to flawlessly utilize both a more offensive-oriented cleric and a more defensive-oriented paladin. However, in the 2 matches that brought them their championships as well as when Fang Shijian was voted into the All-Stars, he had always appeared as Windguard's player. So, those who only looked at the data might forget his true identity. However, those who were familiar with Tiny Herb would never forget this point. Tiny Herb had continued with this style even today. It was just a shame that a player like Fang Shijian, who could reach the top in both classes, was a rare case. The successor Tiny Herb had found, Yuan Boking, could also play both classes, but he couldn't reach Fang Shijian's level. He had trained hard for 2 whole seasons, but had yet to make any breakthroughs. It always felt like the heart of their adaptable strategy wasn't always quite there. Was there really a value to this strategy anymore? This question had been subject to much debate. Apart from the 5 starting players, the 6th player was Zhou Yebai's Ghostblade, Rangoon Creeper. When Chao Yifan had still been present, Rangoon Creeper was still a pure Phantom Demon, but in accordance to the needs of the team this season, Rangoon Creeper had his skill points reset and became a hybrid sword and Phantom Ghostblade. Zhou Yebai seemed to be performing better with the hybrid Ghostblade, too. As for Tyranny, the starting 5 consisted of Han Wenking's Striker, Desert Dust, Lin Jingyan's Brawler, Dark Thunder, Zhang Zhao's Spitfire, 100 Dazzling Blossoms, Qin Muyan's Sharpshooter, -9 Degrees, and Zhang Jinji's Cleric Immovable Rock. Their 6th player was Bai Yanfei's Elementalist, Rhoda. Neither lineup held any surprises, they were both using the same lineup they had stayed with throughout the regular season. In the regular season, each team had 1 victory against the other, both having won their home games. However, the playoffs used a head count point system, so some went back and took a look at the detailed scoring in the team competitions for the 2 matches and found that the head count for the 2 matches were completely the same as well. As for the data on their matches prior to that, there was little use in looking that far back because both teams had gone through huge changes in the summer. As for the only matches they had fought this season, the only decisive factors to their victories seemed only to be the home advantage. This was Tiny Herb's home stadium. Thus, they had won the group arena by a point, but no one could say how large the home advantage was just yet. Next up was the team competition. Although the heart of Tiny Herb's healer switching strategy was no longer present, the chosen healer class would still, to some extent, reveal their approach towards the current match. Clerics focused on offense, Paladin focused on defense, so with the Cleric in the lineup this time, Team Tiny Herb was evidently aiming for a more offense-oriented playstyle. As soon as the match started, they pressed forward. However, in Tyranny's lineup, Han Wenqing, Zhang Jiali, Lin Jingyan and Zhang Jinji had all had quite a bit of experience fighting against Fang Shijian. There was no one more familiar with this strategy of Tiny Herbs than them. Having experienced fighting Fang Shijian and then experiencing Yuan Boking, the four felt that it was shame that they evidently weren't on the same level. Fang Shijian's title was God of Healing, but in reality, his skill often made people forget he was a healer. His ability to attack and defend was much more troublesome to deal with. As for Yuan Boking, no matter if he used a cleric or a paladin, he played well, but the deepest impression that he gave people was of his healing. This was where he differed from Fang Shijian and the reason why it didn't feel like there was any value in Tiny Herb's use of this strategy. Tyranny's veterans knew this very clearly. Against Yuan Boking, they just had to treat him as a normal healer. They didn't think he'd have the ability to give support like Fang Shijian could and make things hard for them. The experience of these veterans helped them make a quick decision. Experience was a treasure and it was the one treasure these veterans were most proud of. However, experience could sometimes hinder you too because sometimes experience was outdated. This sort of experience wasn't correct for the present and therefore would cause errors in judgment. The judgment made by Tyranny's veterans had erred this time. The support from Yuan Boking's cleric was causing them trouble to the point that they were reminded of back when they used to fight against Fang Shijian. Had this player managed to grow so much? The veterans of Tyranny were shocked, seeing the old God of Healing's aura around Yuan Boking's Awedo. This was an oversight and this sort of oversight would always have a price. Tiny Herb won the team competition. The headcount points weren't important any longer. Having already won the group arena, there was no need to calculate the points to know that Tiny Herb was the victor of the opening match. Public opinion of Tyranny's chances at the championship title were highest this season, but being defeated by Team Tiny Herb wasn't exactly completely unexpected. In the post-match press conference, the veterans of Tyranny seemed calm. Tiny Herb played well, there would always be words that needed to be said out of courtesy. Every person will achieve growth every season. Some are noticed but others are ignored. There was no explicit mention of anyone's name, but in reality, Tyranny was scolding themselves. The lineup for Tiny Herb's team competition this year truly was full of the air of growth. Gao Yingji and Xu Bin were both first-timers in the All-Stars, so that didn't need explanation. Apart from them, Liu Xiaobi was no longer that player who brainlessly used his hand speed. He was only a step away from the All-Stars, too. Amongst this striking growth, Yuan Boking had been overlooked. Had he managed to master the key to Fang Shiqian's title of God of Healing without notice? Everyone performed well this match, but Yuan Boking's performance was the key to our victory. He performed amazingly with his support, suppressing our opponents. He guided us to victory this time. When Tiny Herb went up for the press conference, Captain Wang Jiaxi didn't bother hiding his admiration of Yuan Boking's performance this time. This was a surge that no one had ever expected before the match. Everyone was more willing to look at those famous gods or the players that had striking performances in the past. Qin Muyan was the silently ignored fifth, and Yuan Boking was often overlooked. The victory of this match had been decided by this overlooked player. Discussions about him continued throughout the night. Then, the match on the following day was practically the antonym of Tiny Herb and Tyranny's match. The one who was key to victory this time was the god that everyone had been paying attention to and eagerly waiting to see. Zhou Zikai. It was still Zhou Zikai. This extremely silent and shy player off the field had become an uncounterable presence on the field. Everyone knew to take him seriously. Everyone was trying to find a way to deal with him. Everyone was making arrangements to counter him, but it was no use. The Joe Zakai on the field was just ever triumphant like that. Team Wind Howl had exhibited a fierce momentum in this season. Their ace player Tang Hao was a fearless person who could say, "The junior will succeed the senior," in the rookie challenge. But they were defeated. In their home game, Wind Howl was destroyed by Samsara. There was no need for much tactical analysis. Samsara's victory and Wind Howl's defeat only had one reason. Uncounterable. Joe Zakai was uncounterable. All the players that wanted to defeat him all ended up defeated by him. Those who wanted to suppress him with tactics would only end up the one being suppressed. With this sort of defeat, Wind Howl could only accept it. In the post-match press conference, Captain Tang Hao only said one sentence, "Next time, we'll win." This was determination. This was his attitude. But, how would they win? No one could tell. Not even his teammates seemed to have much enthusiasm when Tang Hao said that. Did Tang Hao himself even believe what he was saying? People were doubtful. The mighty Wind Howl had been dealt a direct hit by Samsara. The team that most people were placing their bets on getting the championship, Tyranny, had been defeated because of an abrupt outbreak from an overlooked player. The Four Heavenly Kings combo wasn't undefeatable. Joe Zakai, on the other hand, really didn't seem to have a counter. Who would the champions be? Chapter 1073. Veterans and Rookies. The first round of the semi-finals had cast a shadow over Team Tyranny, whose chances at the championship seemed to be the highest. Last year's champions, Team Samsara, had managed to take a firm step on their path to defend their championship with their impressive performance. Soon enough, the second round of matches of the semi-finals began and Tyranny and Samsara met Tiny Herb and Wind Howl respectively on their home turfs. In the group arena, Team Tyranny won 5-3. The veterans wouldn't fall just because of one loss. They had experienced too many victories and defeats, and no matter which one it would become their motivation to go on. The veterans performed powerfully in the group arena, ending it at their fourth player, Han Wenking. Then, in the team competition that followed, Yuan Boking became a focal point. How would the player who had exhibited the air of the god of healing last match perform this time? In this match, Yuan Boking used the cleric Awaito once more. Logically speaking, you would be more cautious and defensive in an away game, which suited a paladin's style more, but Tiny Herb still chose to use a cleric. This was a sort of attitude. It seemed like Tiny Herb didn't want to drag this out to the third round. They wanted to take their final victory in this away game. They would probably fight even more fiercely in the team competition. That's what everyone thought, but Tyranny didn't seem to think that way. Was it another oversight? Of course not, they were just continuing at their own pace, completely unaffected by their opponent's changes in tactics. This time, they would pay more attention to Yuan Boking's cleric, but not too much. This was because they knew very clearly that Yuan Boking wasn't Tiny Herb's core. Even if the actual god of healing Fang Shijian was on the field, Team Tiny Herb's core was still forever another. Wang Jiaxi, Baccaria? This was Team Tiny Herb's true core. Don't even dream of the veterans of Tyranny overlooking this order of importance. At the beginning of the match, Team Tyranny immediately launched a fierce assault. Under the cover of Zhang Zhao's 100 Blossom style, Han Wenking's Desert Dust darted into the enemy's formation. Zhang Jiali managed to integrate himself into Tyranny extremely quickly, extremely smoothly. Some people said that this might have been because Tyranny's captain, Han Wenking, had a very similar style to Zhang Zhao's old partner, Sun Jeping, so Zhang Jiali easily found a place on the field. Then, whenever there would be the slightest opening, another figure would appear to patch it up. Dark Thunder, Lin Jingyan's Dark Thunder. Speaking of fame, Lin Jingyan was the one with the least fame in Tyranny's four gods. Speaking of ability, he was also the one whose ability was slipping the most clearly, having already been surpassed by his junior. No longer being the tactical core, he had much more room and choice in his play. When there was Zhang Zhao's 100 Blossom style to provide cover, he would hide within and throw a few sneak attacks. When Han Wenking's Desert Dust couldn't come over, he could turn into an strong DPS. The brawler class was one that was suited to multiple styles and its potential was fully unleashed under the hands of an old veteran like Lin Jingyan. Team Tyranny launched a powerful offense. They would no longer overlook any player in Tiny Herb, but they wouldn't cast away their own style aside either. They had to keep the tempo at their pace, otherwise they would be led around by the nose. Team Tyranny held the initiative from the very beginning, accumulating advantages and walking towards victory step by step. As for their master tactician, Zhang Jinji carefully watched over the entire battlefield. He was like a machine, always making sure to minimize possible mistakes. This sort of healer was the most secure shield at your back. Victory. Tyranny eventually managed to earn back a victory on their home turf. Yuan Boking, who had been the center of focus before the match, had performed well as well. It was just that, this time, he wasn't a surprise for Tyranny anymore. To a group of people who had experience fighting Fang Shijian, Quan Boking wasn't an uncounterable presence for them. In the post-match press conference, the words of Tiny Herb's captain, Wang Jiaxi, were very cliché, but were also an accurate depiction of the match. We played well, but our opponents did better. Just like when the two teams fought in the regular season, neither side committed any serious mistakes that had clearly affected the victory of the match. Everyone had performed well, they exchanged blows, slowly accumulating their advantage until, in the end, Tiny Herb fell and Tyranny still stood. Tiny Herb and Tyranny had fought to a tie, 1-1, and needed to use the third and last match to decide their victory. It would be held on Tyranny's turf, but they wouldn't have the right to choose the map. In the other match of the second round of the semi-finals, Samsara fought their home game against Wind Howl. Wind Howl, who had lost their home game, was obviously not in the right headspace for this match. Although their captain Tang Hao had expressed a determined attitude after the last match, the fact that Team Wind Howl lacked playoffs experience was clear in this match. They weren't like Tyranny's veterans who could face a loss with such ease, their mindsets remaining unaffected. The young members of Wind Howl had been obviously overcautious and hesitant. Their uncertainty in tactical decisions were extremely apparent. The Wind Howl of the regular season pressed forward with determination. They were fearless, and their spirit was indomitable. However, in the playoffs, they began to become afraid. This was because the rules of the playoffs were different. A single loss might cut off their future path and turn all their efforts to dust. Now, they were standing at such a crossroads. Victory meant that they might be able to survive, but failure meant that everything would end there. This sort of pressure wasn't something that was present in the regular season. They had managed a smooth journey in the first round of the playoffs, crushing Misty Rain in 2 rounds and entering the semi-finals. That was all until they had lost their home game to Samsara in the first round of the semi-finals. Team Wind Howl had suddenly fallen into a dire situation. The pressure they were under caused the members of Wind Howl to panic. Even though they had a veteran like Fang Rui, he couldn't save the whole team. Fang Rui wasn't the head of this team, and his dirty playstyle wasn't one that gave him any advantage in boosting everyone's morale. The second round ended in Team Wind Howl's defeat. Team Samsara walked towards the finals with their heads high and shoulders back, and Wind Howl. They had caught everyone's attention during this season, yet ended on such a pathetic note. All the players who hated Tang Hao's attitude were delighted. However, Wind Howl was young. No matter if it was Tang Hao or Zhao Yuji, they still had plenty of time to fight for what they wanted. It all depended on if they could learn something from their defeat or not. After 2 rounds of the semi-finals, Samsara had managed to get into the finals, while Tiny Herb and Tyranny would have to duke it out in a third round. After 3 days, the final match between the two began on Tyranny's turf and a foreign map. The two had been careful from the group arena, eventually fighting to each of their last members again. In the end, it was Tiny Herb that won 5-4, taking the lead. Entering the team competition with a lead of 1 point was still some form of an advantage. However, in the team competition, Tiny Herb, who had the lead, seemed to be even more cautious than Tyranny. On a foreign map, the two sides didn't rush to fight. The characters of both teams were scattered across the map, but within supporting distance. It seemed that they were trying to get a hold of the terrain before striking. After 2 minutes, the two sides still hadn't met, but they had swapped places. Tiny Herb's characters were all in Tyranny's half of the map, while Tyranny's characters had all come to the side of the map Tiny Herb started on. Both sides continued to scout out the map. The first contact between the two sides finally occurred then. It only occurred, but it didn't erupt because the contact they had was rather shameless. Team Tyranny's Lin Jingyan had seen Tiny Herb's Awaito as he wandered across the map and dexterously hit his character, Dark Thunder. He didn't immediately find a chance to attack and carefully began to tail the other instead. At the same time, he kept up a string of messages to the team chat, reporting on what was occurring. Team Tyranny began to make a tactical movement. All the characters closed in on Awado's position. However, the audience could see with their omniscient view that even if Tyranny successfully trapped Awado, they would only be able to steal the initiative. It wouldn't be so easily to take out Awado in one wave. This was because Tiny Herb's characters weren't scattered at random. They were all within supporting distance. If anyone sent out a message for help, other characters would be there to support them within seconds. However, Team Tyranny's members weren't impatient either. Their characters arrived at the appointed positions one by one, but no one rushed forwards to attack. Even when all 5 had arrived, they were still adjusting their positions. Tiny Herb's possible support was all within their expectations. Their current arrangement was made to restrict this sort of support. With these veterans, they would still pry out openings even if there were none. Now that this chance had appeared in front of them, they had to take hold of it firmly. Everything had to be prepared before they struck. These adjustments without any sort of direct clash was boring to watch. However, any spectator with a bare minimum knowledge and glory would feel the tension in this situation. Was it time to strike? They could strike, right? Are they still not going to strike? Countless spectators felt that the time was ripe again and again, but reality told them, again and again, that these veterans of tyranny were far calmer than they. With these 3 veterans and the careful and precise master tactician Zhang Jinji, did Team Tyranny intend to make a flawless arrangement? There was no such thing as a flawless arrangement on the battlefield. What Zhang Jinji hoped to do was simply minimize the chances of an accident occurring. Forward. The order appeared into the chat. Bang! The sound of a sniper rifle split the air. Qin Muyan had been aiming for a while now, and finally shot upon receiving this order. With that gunshot, he was exposed. However, once the battle started, everyone would be exposed. Tyranny's arrangements were made to deal with what would happen after they were exposed. The 5 characters had already charged forth as one. Chapter 1074. Tyranny's Tempo. The spectators could see everything far more clearly than any of the players. The 10 characters had originally been scattered around the map, but after the gunshot, all of them suddenly headed towards the same location. In the blink of an eye, blossoms sprouted all around the map as battles formed. Only now did spectators realize Team Tyranny's intentions. Team Tyranny didn't seem to be targeting Team Tiny Herb's cleric, Awado. Their aim was to cut off Awado's connection with everyone else. Battles had bloomed all over the map. Yuan Boking suddenly discovered that there was nothing for him to do. Tyranny had led all of the conflicts away from him. Where do I go? For an instant, Yuan Boking was faced with this question. There were sounds of battle all around him. Which location should he go assist? Fortunately, an order quickly came from the team chat. It wasn't just him. All of Team Tiny Herb was heading towards a single rendezvous point. Since Tyranny had started these waves of attacks, there was no need to question who held the initiative at the moment. Tiny Herb clearly didn't want to start a fight with Tyranny under these circumstances. If they did, they would only fall into Tyranny's tempo. First, group up. Then, counterattack. Wang Jiaxi's decision was clear and precise, but it wasn't anything surprising. This type of response was completely within Tyranny's plans. In a map with lots of dips and slopes like this one, a player's line of sight would often be blocked. No one could see the entire situation with just a glance. The only ones who could were the spectators, who possessed an omniscient view of the map. The spectators could see that Tiny Herb's attempt to convene together would be obstructed because of this. Tyranny cut off Tiny Herb's characters from each other. They didn't immediately choose a main target to attack. They made adjustments according to the situation. Team Tyranny moved quickly. The communication going on in their team chat was also very rapid. They used concise but comprehensive words to communicate. Only the most coordinated teammates could instantly understand the meanings behind their short messages. As for the spectators, they could only see a bunch of letters and numbers being spewed out. They had no idea what anyone in Tyranny was saying. However, they could still see the results of their communication. In the end, Team Tiny Herb's players were successfully partitioned off from each other. Gao Yingji's kind tree and Lu Xiaobi's flying sword were cut out and pushed towards a location that Tyranny wanted them to be at. Attack. Another order. This time, Tyranny was truly attacking now. Dazzling Hundred Blossoms attacks instantly swallowed up that location. Zhang Jiali never attacked solely to damage the target. Oftentimes, he would provide cover for others. The brilliant lights only hit the ground, but who would be coming out from the light? Would it be Han Wenqing's Desert Dust? Would it be Lin Jingyan's Dark Thunder? Or would it be no one? No matter what the choice was, the opposing players needed to be on guard. The purpose of Zhang Jiao's Hundred Blossoms style was to confuse the opponents and have them question what decision to make. This time, under the cover of the Hundred Blossoms style, Han Wenqing's Desert Dust shot out. Liu Xiaobi reacted extremely quickly. Flying Sword brandished his sword and welcomed Desert Dust. Without any hesitation, he unleashed his explosive hand speed. Against a waning old general at the end of his career, explosive hand speed was a smart way to match his biggest strength against his opponent's biggest weakness. Liu Xiaobi knew what the current situation was, so he wasn't polite at all. The crowd exclaimed in surprise at Liu Xiaobi's explosiveness. The screen displayed a number. Liu Xiaobi's APM had surpassed 300. In Glory, each player could only control one character. It wasn't like RTSEs, where there was a lot of room to get to a high APM. 300 APM. In Glory, this was already an unimaginable number. For many, it wasn't a question of whether they could move their hands fast enough, but rather what to do with each action. And right now, Liu Xiaobi's 300 APM was just a starting point. It was still going up. Shadow Steps. The moment Flying Sword clashed with Desert Dust, 7 shadows split up. With the level cap increasing along with Liu Xiaobi's frightening hand speed, what players could only dream of had been achieved in just an instant. Each and every shadow seemed real. Which one was real? Which one was fake? Perhaps not even an experienced god like Han Wenqing could distinguish them in a short amount of time. As a result, he simply didn't bother trying. Playing rock paper scissors with his opponent wasn't his style. He was always simple and direct. 7 shadows. Desert Dust charged past them directly towards Gao Yingji's Kind Tree. Liu Xiaobi immediately had Flying Sword turn around and chased after him with a sword slash. But when he turned around, a brick flew out from the cover of Dazzling Hundred Blossoms light cover. In the next moment, the Hundred Blossoms style stopped being just a simple cover and swallowed up Flying Sword. The viewers could see Flying Sword's health rapidly dropping. Liu Xiaobi and his explosive hand speed had been denied by these two seniors simply and easily. As for Liu Xiaobi, after being engulfed by the Hundred Blossoms style, the damage was secondary. More importantly, he felt like he couldn't see anything. Slowly, he started getting used to it and saw Dark Thunder. When Liu Xiaobi saw an enemy, he got ready to rush forward. Suddenly, a white light blazed around his body. A sacred fire had been cast beneath his feet. Dazzling Hundred Blossoms interference must be stopped. Liu Xiaobi was still clear-headed. Tyranny was a formidable opponent that they had already fought 2 matches against in the playoffs. At this point, both sides had a good grasp of each other's methods. Hundred Blossoms style must be cut off from the source. If not, they would be harassed endlessly. It would be delusional to think that this cover was also a cover for him. That type of Hundred Blossoms style would just be a fake. The Hundred Blossoms style from Zhang Jiali was absolutely a targeted one. It wasn't just cycling through different skills to produce a dazzling effect. Whatever attack came out and wherever that attack hit had careful thinking behind it. As a result, those who were locked down by a true Hundred Blossoms style would be the only ones locked down. Only Tyranny's players and the spectators would be able to clearly see the situation when a true Hundred Blossoms style was unleashed. Liu Xiaobi determined Dazzling Hundred Blossoms' position. He ignored his silenced skills and rushed over. Zhang Jiali obviously wasn't going to let him come close. He attacked while retreating, maintaining the distance between the two of them. Several seconds soon passed, and the silence on Flying Sword wore off. Liu Xiaobi sprinted forward and activated triple slash. Sword light flashed in a straight line along with a handful of sand towards it. Liu Xiaobi's hand speed really was fast. Without any delay, he was able to tilt his Flying Sword's head a bit. However, a brick immediately followed and hit the back of his head. Liu Xiaobi wanted to cry. This Lin Jingyan hadn't been so dirty back when he played on Wind Howl. But after coming to Tyranny, his style had changed a lot. After being put into a dizzy state, how could Flying Sword be in a good spot? A new wave of attacks suddenly washed over him. His teammate, Gao Yingji, had noticed that the situation wasn't looking good a long time ago. He had been trying to come over to rescue him, but escaping from Han Wenking couldn't be accomplished with just a sweep of his broom. Tiny Herb's other 3 members had convened without a hitch. But then, they immediately received messages from Liu Xiaobi and Gao Yingji. And at this moment, the 3 could still hear sounds of gunfire nearby. Tyranny's 5th player, Qin Muyan, was a sharpshooter. He deceitfully misled Tiny Herb. By the time Tiny Herb reacted, the team had already been split into 2. The 3 immediately went to rescue their teammates. Qin Muyan obviously couldn't stop them alone. He could only hinder them a bit. But by the time the 3 rushed over, Liu Xiaobi's flying sword was on the brink of death. Yuan Boking hastily had his Awedo go over to save him, but to his surprise, dazzling 100 Blossoms attacks instantly enshrouded them. With his sight blocked, Yuan Boking was unable to find Flying Sword's location. On the other hand, Liu Xiaobi's vision suddenly became clear. His spirit rose. Even though he didn't have much health left, he still went after Zhang Jinji's cleric, a movable rock. Bang! A gunshot. Tiny Herb's 3 players arrived. Tyranny's Qin Muyan naturally returned to his team as well. When he returned, he saw an opening and accurately shot Flying Sword's head with a Thunder Snipe. Thunder Snipe's hidden effect, headshots dealt double damage. A spurt of blood flew out from Flying Sword's head. This attack looked as if it actually blew up his head as Flying Sword fell. In the team competition, Team Tyranny won the first point. Killing Flying Sword gave Tyranny a numbers advantage for a short period of time. They didn't waste it and immediately began attacking. With an advantage already established, these old generals definitely wouldn't let it go to waste. In this instant, they seemed to have forgotten their age. Just like Liu Xiaobi, they disregarded everything else and burst out with explosive hand speed. On the screen, the statistics showed that the APM from the players on the 2 teams rose and rose. The intensity of the battle could be seen just from these statistics. Team Tiny Herb's captain Wang Jiexi had broken through to the 350 to 400 APM range. His magician style was originally a style that required a lot of actions. Tiny Herb was able to get their 6th player into the battle intact, but intact was just in terms of the number of their players. Tyranny still dealt Tiny Herb a huge amount of damage during this time. Tyranny's old generals knew how to utilize their numbers advantage. Even though they weren't able to kill off anyone in Tiny Herb, their advantage only increased with this wave of attacks. 5 versus 5. Tyranny slowed down their tempo. Competing hand speeds wasn't their strong point. Seizing an opening to do a single wave of attacks was fine, but if they tried to keep up that hand speed, these old generals would be dying. The advantage had been established. As a result, Tyranny did not try to end it in one go and instead slowed down to play the long game with Tiny Herb. As the 2 went back and forth, many viewers discovered that Team Tyranny's Qin Muyan received a very pitiful amount of healing. It was as if he was being intentionally cast away. This type of slip-up wouldn't happen to someone like Zhang Jinji. This was a tactical decision. Those with a certain amount of glory knowledge could determine that Team Tyranny was trying to switch out their player. Even though Team Tyranny had slowed down, they did their utmost to maintain their advantage. Surely and steadily, Qin Muyan successfully swapped out with their 6th player Bai Yanfei. The healing saved by not healing Qin Muyan was effectively distributed to the other 4, so their conditions were very good. The full health and full mana 6th player on Tyranny swapped with their dead sharpshooter, -9 degrees, and Tyranny's advantage moved one step further. In the end, Tyranny didn't let their advantage go. In the team competition, Tyranny beat Tiny Herb 6-3, winning the semi-finals 10-8 and progressing to the finals. Chapter 1075. A samsara you shouldn't underestimate. Congrats to Tyranny, I wish them luck. In the post-match press conference, Tiny Herb's captain, Wang Jiexi, put a full stop to Tiny Herb's journey this season with a well-wish for their opponent. Even though they failed to reach the end this season, everyone had seen Tiny Herb's future. Xu Bin, Liu Xiaobi, Gao Yingji, all of Tiny Herb's players had talent, they were all young, with much room to grow. Even Yuan Boking, who had been rather overlooked, had shown everyone something amazing in the match. There was also their captain, Wang Jiexi. Even though he wouldn't be able to stay in his peak state for too much longer, he had valuable experience that he could use to help his team. He would always be Tiny Herb's pilar. As for Tyranny? Next up, the finals. Captain Han Wenking's brief but clear words showed everyone the team's determination. Why these veterans all got together and what this was all for was clear as day. Now, they had come this far. Only 2 victories stood between them and the championship. Even the opponent they had just beaten had sincerely wished them well. The announcement regarding the finals quickly spread. This was the annual CR de la CR match in the entire Glory Circle. It was just a shame that Samsara and Tyranny didn't have anything between them to really talk about. The players of the 2 teams didn't have any particularly striking past clashes and relationships that could be discussed either. This was purely a fight to be the champions. On one side was the veterans who had allied together to achieve their long-awaited dream. On the other side, it was the defending champions who wanted to build a new dynasty. Tyranny was very focused on performing as a whole, while Samsara was always known as a one-man team. This seemed to also be a clash of 2 kinds of ideals in Glory. Who would be the champions? With the finals being promoted everywhere, there would obviously be public polls in regards to who would win. In the end, Team Tyranny held a whooping 72.65%, far ahead of Samsara. However, over at Happy, Yi Shu couldn't give an answer to Chen Guo's question of, who do you think will win? They both have a chance. It wouldn't be surprising for either of them to win, was how Yi Shu answered. This was the most rational answer. Although Team Tyranny had won an extreme high percentage of votes in the public poll, most of the votes were an emotional decision. Team Tyranny's veterans didn't have many more chances. Their fight, backs to the water, was a moving tale for people. In addition, Tyranny was filled with widely renowned names. On paper, their lineup couldn't be more magnificent. The 72.65% vote was more of a hope and support. The gap between Samsara and Tyranny's combative ability wasn't nearly as absurd as the poll made it out to be. One-man team? This mocking title was an underestimation of Samsara's abilities. However, out of the in the pro scene, how many people would actually agree with this phrase? In their eyes, the idea of a one-man team was no more than a joke. Samsara definitely wasn't a one-man team. It was just because Joe Sakai was too strong, too striking, too eye-catching, that there would be the illusion of a one-man team. Team Samsara was also a very talented team. Their entire team could keep up with Joe Sakai's pace, and that was already the best proof. Although they sometimes relied on Joe Sakai's forceful momentum to take the upper hand, seeming like they had no strategy, in reality, this forcefulness was a unique strategy of Samsara's, a strategy that only they, having the uncounterable Joe Sakai, could use, a strategy that many teams wish they could use too. The only people who underestimated Team Samsara because of the saying, one-man team, were all clueless outsiders. This sort of mistake would never happen in Team Tyranny. They would carefully gauge Samsara's strength. The uncounterable Joe Sakai. That was what everyone would think of when Samsara was mentioned. But apart from that, had anyone realized that, out of the semi-finalists, Samsara's lineup was the most stable? The other 3 teams had all gone through massive changes in the summer. Only Samsara kept their original lineup, a lineup that stayed the same for 3 whole years. This sort of stability was something the other semi-finalists didn't have. Apart from that, Samsara's skill point advantage was extremely apparent in the last playoffs. After this season, it was no longer a secret. But, even if it wasn't a secret, what could they do about it? You could only keep in mind and beware of this sort of solid advantage, but you would never be able to get rid of it. When people thought of Joe Sakai the moment Samsara was mentioned, they hadn't noticed that they had covered up a lot of other terrifying aspects about Samsara with the Joe Sakai halo. Zhang Batao, ranked 5 in the All-Stars, seemed to be just a random passerby under the Joe halo, never mind the 13th ranked Liu Boyuan. On Samsara's side, they also had 3 All-Star players, and they were all in their peak years of their career. Tyranny's 4 All-Stars was a number advantage, but if you considered their age and state, was this 4 against 3 any significant advantage? How it will end up will be decided by the match. That was the judgment Yi Shu gave in the end. By then, Tyranny and Samsara's players were already standing on the stage. The first round of the finals would be held in City S, Samsara's home turf. There wasn't a single empty seat in the stadium. In the group arena that had just finished, Samsara took a lead of 5-4. It wasn't a big advantage, but the venue exploded with excitement from it. The fans filled the stadium, raising their self-made flags and signs, eagerly anticipating their team's second championship. The lineups for the team competition were already being broadcasted through the PA system. Team Samsara, Zhou Zekai's Sharpshooter, Cloud Piercer, Zhang Batao's Spellblade, Empty Waves, Lu Boiwan's Grappler, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain, Wu Qi's Assassin, Cruel Silence, Fang Minggua's Cleric, Laughing Song, Du Ming's Blade Master, Moon Luring Frost. A lineup that had stayed the same for 3 years, the lineup that had taken last year's championship. When they came out, the entire venue erupted with thunderous cheers. Tyranny didn't give everyone any surprises either. The four gods would obviously be fighting. Their fifth player was still the ever-low-key Qin Muyan and his sharpshooter, -9 degrees. The sixth player was Bai Yanfei and his elementalist, Rhoda. This was also the lineup they had stayed with throughout the playoffs. The players entered their competition booths and, soon enough, the match that would decide the finals began. As the home team, Samsara had taken the initiative ever since the group arena, and the team competition was no different. They had only just loaded when the entire team flew towards the center of the map, as if not wanting to waste a single second. However, the visiting team, Tyranny, also showed a vigor that didn't lose to the home team. As soon as they were loaded, they also sped straight for the center of the map. Wow, both sides seem very impatient. The commentators for the broadcast were also very surprised at the scene before them. In the finals, the final battleground that a year of hard work had taken them to, even the most fierce and eager teams would gain a hint of caution. This was because the results of this match were too important. Most teams would first consider how to establish a secure advantage and then carefully execute their plans for victory. However, right now, Samsara and Tyranny were both charging forward boldly, seeming like they wanted to end this battle as soon as possible. They were treating the saying, the nameless finals, as a joke ***. Clash. An intense clash. The gunners of each team fired the moment they got into shooting range. However, on one side, it was the great gunner of glory, while on the other side, it was a barely known rookie. The disparity between them was large enough that even the commentators didn't have the heart to call it a face-off. However, soon after, dazzling 100 Blossoms style covered the area with flashing lights. Tyranny had began their breakthrough into Samsara's formation under the cover of these explosions. Team Samsara didn't show any form of weakness. Zhang Batao's empty waves immediately set down two wave formations, creating a hard-to-penetrate barrier, but the light and shadows of 100 Blossoms style immediately came down on them. They wanted to brute force their way through? Tyranny's unyielding momentum was rather unexpected for Samsara. Although the wave formations of Spellblades didn't have all sorts of status-inducing attacks, they had far higher damage output than Ghost Boundaries. Charging through the wave formations, they wanted to launch an offense regardless of the damage they had to take. However, this adhered to Team Tyranny's usual attitude. Didn't this team always charge forth no matter what obstacles there were? Just two wave formations wouldn't scare them. Then, what about two more? Zhang Batao wasn't stingy with his skills at all, immediately sending out two more wave formations. Light, darkness, ice and fire. Wave formations of the four great elements overlapped and shone, clashing with the 100 Blossom lights and creating chaos. Lu Boiwan's chaotic cloudy mountains and Wu Qi's cruel silence were hidden outside the wave formations, waiting to ambush whoever charged out. Who would have expected that no one jumped out of the flashing lights and, instead, the flashing lights moved forward. The lights of the 100 Blossom style were all Spitfire skills, and all dealt damage. Lu Boiwan and Wu Qi had to back away. However, after that, the two took a side each simultaneously, going around the 100 Blossom style's light cover to get to dazzling 100 Blossoms. No one expected that the two would be welcomed with two powerful skills upon going around. Ferocious Tiger Flurry. Tyrannical Chain Punch. The moment those two characters went around the light cover, the two fighter-class characters of Tyranny charged forth. Desert Dust punched and kicked, forcing Cruel Silence into a retreat. As for the grappler, Chaotic Cloudy Mountain, who was good at grab skills, he had been pressed into the ground and beaten by Lin Jingyan's Dark Thunder. The two characters weren't hiding within the lights? Then what about dazzling 100 Blossoms? The 100 Blossom style lights were still advancing, but there was no sign of dazzling 100 Blossoms. There was only one possibility, the one advancing under the cover of the lights was dazzling 100 Blossoms himself. Be careful. The two hastily sent the message. Misjudging Dazzling Hundred Blossoms' positioning meant that they had misjudged the area Hundred Blossoms' style could affect. So in the next moment, the lights of Hundred Blossoms seemed to have teleported, suddenly appearing farther away and directly onto Samsara's cleric, Laughing Song. But this time, Dazzling Hundred Blossoms wasn't providing cover for anyone or hindering visibility. He had launched a fierce offensive on Samsara's cleric. Team Tyranny's opening was shocking. Dazzling Hundred Blossoms had covered for himself and charged into shooting range before directly unleashing a strong assault on the opponent's cleric. "We have to win," Zhang Jiali roared. The light cover left Dazzling Hundred Blossoms right before he darted past empty waves, shooting at Laughing Song as he ran.